Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to do another rewatch video of Quantum Leap, Season 2, Episode 11, A Portrait for Troian. The episode's description reads as follows. Sam must save a young woman who drowns while insisting that she's hearing the calls of her dead husband. Okay, the wording on that isn't great. It should probably read, save from drowning, not save a woman who drowns, because if you've already drowned, you're beyond saving. The episode was written by Donald P. Belzerio. He gets credit for the teleplay. Scott Shepard, who has a teleplay credit along with a story credit, and John Hill. The episode was directed by Michael Zinberg, who directed a total of 9 episodes. In addition to that, he directed episodes of The Bob Newhart Show, NCIS, which is another Donald P. Belzerio series, The Good Fight, recent, Evil, and another Scott Bakula-led series in NCIS New Orleans. The episode takes place on February 7th, 1971, and originally aired on December 13th, 1989. It was the last episode to air during the course of 1989, and to happen in the 80s. From now on, the series will be firmly placed in the 90s. Before going any further, I will tell you a couple of things. 1. This is not a spoiler-free video, so if you haven't watched the episode, please go and check it out, or maybe you won't want to after watching this, but check it out and then come and watch my video. Secondly, if you like this video and want to support the channel, please like, share, and comment, as well as subscribing to my channel. Now, if you are a regular watcher of my videos, then you should kind of know already how I feel about this episode. I've mentioned it numerous times throughout my Season 2 episodes that I don't think very much of this episode. In fact, I think it's one of the worst of the series. I cannot think of a worse episode, though there are other bad episodes. Some even this season. One of them is a personal taste thing, it's just not my thing, and the other is just a bad episode. Now, it is tempting to lay this all on the feet of Deborah Pratt, one of the creative forces behind the series, who makes a guest starring appearance. And I'm not going to mince words here, but she is incredibly horrendous in this episode. But the thing is, after rewatching the video, I realized that she is not the only bad actor in this episode. We also have the one playing her brother, who appeared in She's the Man, The Game Plan, The Race to Witch Mountain, the reboot of that particular movie, the original airing much earlier, I think somewhere in the 70s. I couldn't tell you if he's done better elsewhere because I haven't actually watched any of his appearances, and if I did, I didn't recognize the guy. As for Deborah Pratt, I've pretty much given you her filmography before. I also don't know if she's better elsewhere. The most recognizable project that I saw her in was Exit to Eden, which is a movie that I had always assumed was designed to torture terrorists into giving up information, and thus I never actually watched the movie. I've said in the past that this is a series that absolutely relies on its guest cast, and that a bad guest cast can absolutely sink an episode, and these two are definitely pretty terrible. But they are not the only ones. Neither Scott Bakula or Dean Stockwell is particularly good in this episode, and both are usually pretty reliable performers during the course of this series. So who am I blaming for this episode being as terrible as it is? Well, frankly, I'm not too sure. Could it be the writing? Yes, the writing is pretty bad in spots. In fact, sometimes it seems like a loose outline of a script and not a fully written script. It seems like we're missing part of the story. The other possibility is the directing. Well, the director of this episode, Michael Zinberg, as I said, went on to direct 9 episodes of the series, including Season 3's A Little Miracle, which is a great episode of the series. So, Michael Zinberg is better than this, so I'm not sure that he's totally at fault here. Maybe this series just sucks at doing gothic horror, which is what this episode resembles. I don't know, I'm not really sure, but I'll give you a little context on this episode. I've talked about in previous videos production order versus airing order. Now, this episode was originally filmed as part of Season 1. In fact, on one streaming service, Bravo I believe it is, it has this as the season finale of Season 1, which would have been absolutely a horrible way for the series to end Season 1 on. I strongly suspect that the creators knew they had a turkey on their hands, so they buried it deep into Season 2. Back in the old days, when television wasn't quite so serialized as it is today, they would tend to front-load their best episodes at the beginning and at the end of the season, saving the bad or mediocre episodes for the middle of the season. And this is Season 2, Episode 11, which is smack dab in the middle of the season. The Troian of this episode is actually named after Donald P. Belzerio's and Deborah Pratt's daughter. As it turns out, she has said in interviews that she did not appreciate being named after such a creepy episode. Troian herself will appear in a couple episodes from now in Another Mother. We begin this episode on a dark and stormy night. Sam finds himself in a graveyard and soon meets Troian, who calls out for Julian. And oh, by the way, here's a drinking game for you. Take a shot every time Troian mentions the name Julian, her late husband, who she thinks is haunting her after drowning in the lake. Actually, scratch that. Don't play that game, because you will be dead by the end of the episode, and I will not have that on my conscience. I will be dead within the first 5 minutes because I have a much different and lesser alcoholic tolerance than most people have. Sam suggests they seek shelter, and Troian goes into a crypt. Well, that's not exactly what Sam Beckett had in mind, but Sam goes anyway. Deborah Pratt, right off the bat, is making my ears bleed with her less than stellar performance. And credits. When we come back, Sam and Troian enter the house, where we meet Miss Stoltz, who's played by Carolyn Seymour. Carolyn Seymour is one of those actors that I can actually name off her filmography without even looking. She has 4 appearances in this series, 3 of which are during the Evil Leaper series later in Season 5. In addition to that, she has a couple of appearances on Star Trek The Next Generation, one as a Romulan commander, and the other in the episode First Contact, which I believe aired in Season 5. In addition to that, she has a couple of appearances on Star Trek Voyager, playing a very similar character as to what she plays here. She's fine here, but she's not enough to save this episode at all. Here, she's playing basically the housekeeper, and she has her usual Carolyn Seymour delivery, and does not seem all that happy about Dr. Beckett's appearance here. And I say Dr. Beckett because I don't think she sees the person that he leaped into. I believe she sees him right off the bat. Sam has leaped into a parapsychologist who is there to help Julian, or rather Troian, figure out and prove if her dead husband is really trying to reach out for her beyond the grave. We soon meet Jimmy, played by Robert Torti, Troian's brother, and right away we have an acting clinic in terrible acting as the two of them, Deborah Pratt and Robert Torti, conspire to make my ears bleed until I am dead. After Troian goes off to change clothes, Jimmy comes after the doctor because he doesn't like his presence. He doesn't like the doctor playing in to Troian looking for her dead husband. At least that's what he says. He comes at Sam hostilely, and Sam in response responds with hostility as well. And that seems out of character for Sam Beckett, who usually acts in these situations, especially when he first arrives on the scene, in a very different manner. Sam's mirror image, by the way, is played by none other than Donald P. Belzerio himself. It's too bad that Deborah Pratt, Donald P. Belzerio, and the name Troian, their daughter's name, couldn't have occurred in a much better episode than this. Mrs. Stoltz arrives back with his tea, and then we have Al's first appearance, which she can clearly see as she says that strangers are not welcome while looking directly at Al. Al's first appearance is happening at the 6-minute and 16-second mark. During the course of this conversation, we learned that Julian was an author and Troian was an illustrator, a very successful one at that. She used to illustrate Julian's books until Julian drowned in the lake. And Dean Stockwell is a very physical actor. He does a lot of gesturing with his hands. Most of the time, I don't have a problem with this. In fact, it's great. It's fine. He's usually really good. Here, I found his gesturing to be distracting. As it turns out, Sam is there to prevent Troian from suffering the same fate. We cut to Troian waking up. It's still lightning outside. She lights a candle, and wouldn't you know it, there's tracks, wet water tracks, leading out of her room. Now, I want to see an alternative episode where Jimmy is trying to make these wet, ghostly tracks, and Troian wakes up to discover him. She must sleep like the dead if Jimmy can go into her room and make these tracks. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert, Jimmy's behind all of this. If you took my advice, you would have already watched this episode before watching my video, and thus I am not really spoiling anything. Troian follows the tracks out of her room, and we have a brief scene, because apparently the power is out, where Sam approaches Jimmy. He asks if the storm knocked the power out, and Jimmy replies, "No, it's the ghosts." Troian, meanwhile, goes into her room, and she discovers something that makes her profoundly unhappy. So she screams, which attracts the attention of both Jimmy and Sam, who run to her aid. And what she was reacting to was a painting, which Jimmy points out she got rid of. And Troian says she threw it into the lake. Okay, once again, Jimmy is behind all of this. We later find out that there's absolutely nothing special about that lake. There's nothing that specifically causes people to drown. Sam Beckett ends up swimming in that lake at one point, and he turns out to be just fine. Jimmy, on the other hand, not so much, which leads me to the conclusion that Jimmy does not know how to swim. Why am I bringing this up? Because Troian just said that she threw the painting in the lake. Couple of questions here. What happens to a painting when you throw it in a body of water? Does it float or does it sink? Secondly, Jimmy would have to be around somewhere to witness Troian throwing this painting in the lake so that she could later retrieve it. He would have to do so when Troian was no longer there. Otherwise, she would question why. If the painting were to just sink, then there would be no chance of Jimmy retrieving it. Since Jimmy can't swim, if she threw it off the dock far enough, there would be no chance of him retrieving it without swimming to it, which he clearly can't do. I suppose if the painting were close enough to the dock, he would be able to fish it out through other means. And then he would have to store it somewhere where she wouldn't happen upon it until he was ready to screw with her with it. Oh, and one other thing. Water does damage to paintings. It alters the look of paintings. So, I'm not convinced that if he were to find the painting in the water, that this painting would not be more damaged than what it is. In a better episode, I wouldn't be nitpicking quite so much about this. But here we are. We cut to a scene of the dock near the lake with Sam and Troian. We learn that Julian and Troian were on the lake. Julian, clowning around, jumped in the lake, and he never resurfaced. Apparently, he was a superb swimmer. Before she knew anything was wrong, it was too late, and he never came back to the surface. And she herself couldn't swim. Well then, Troian, you shouldn't have been on the boat. I hope you were wearing a life jacket at least. Sam tries to find rational explanations for what's going on here, and Troian doesn't want to hear it. She gets upset, saying that Sam is there to prove that Julian really is trying to reach out. And then there's this weird moment where they almost kiss. There was no sexual tension before this, and there will be no sexual tension after this, so this is a very weird moment. Though there is hints that the doctor that Sam replaced did indeed have some feelings for Troian. We then have a scene where Al proclaims that the lake is so cold that Julian must need a cuddle buddy. Aww, but Sam is not buying it. And Al asks, do you have a better explanation? Well, yes. Someone is trying to drive Troian insane, and his vote is for Miss Stoltz. Sam goes on to point out that the equipment that Dr. Mintz was using for ghost hunting is actually not bad for 71. It's designed to pick up electrical activity, and it picked up Sam Beckett's leap, which is actually a pretty cool idea. And it is also designed to pick up brainwaves, which is why Al at times can actually be heard. Jimmy enters the scene with another bone to pick. Apparently, in the picture, the painting now has a little ghostly figure underneath the water. My, that Jimmy is certainly talented, because he's the one who did it. It soon becomes apparent that Jimmy can hear Al, and this is a pretty cool idea, undermined by a extremely aggravating performance from Robert Torti. As soon as Al realizes that Jimmy can hear him, he adioses out of there. The next morning, we have a series of scenes that I don't really feel like talking about, but they do feature one of Quantum Leap's kisses with history, according to Al's place. The earthquakes featured in this episode actually happened, and were the worst recorded earthquake in the history of the city, with the heaviest death toll. According to Al's place, the earthquake measured at 6.5 on the Richter scale. Later on, Jimmy is trying to fix a TV, while Miss Stoltz is talking about how she doesn't watch TV in the haughty delivery that only Carolyn Seymour can deliver. Sam Beckett is still trying to find alternative reasons for her hearing ghosts and for the machines picking up what it does. and he surmises that the machine was actually picking up the earthquake. But once again, she doesn't want to hear about alternative explanations for what's going on. The only explanation she is interested in hearing is that Julian is calling for her. Meanwhile, Jimmy is going to go see the disaster brought upon by the earthquake for himself. He wants to go see it in person. And Sam mentions the fact that they probably don't need any gawkers. Jimmy responds by asking, "What's wrong, Doc? My sis catching on to you?" Cut to Sam back in the crypt with the machinery that helps Al be heard, the ghost hunting equipment. He's curious how it's allowing people to hear Al, and he's speculating that it's through Sam's brainwaves. Al appears to act like an idiot, being creeped out by the dead people he sees all around, calling it unnatural, when in fact it very much is natural. Sam wants to alter the equipment to find low voltage battery emissions, and he's asking for Al's help. And, why? Sam Beckett is a genius. Why would he need Al's help for that? Why couldn't he figure that out for himself? We cut to a poorly acted scene with Deborah Pratt's character, who's of course playing Troian, asking Julian what he wants. Eventually, she discovers an addition to the painting, which is her as a ghostly figure at the bottom of the lake, and this greatly upsets her. We cut back to Sam, who's successfully located the device that he was looking for, which turns out to be a tape recorder. He plays the tape recorder and hears nothing, and eventually he speculates, perhaps, is it possible that a voice could be recorded in such a high frequency that only people who can hear at that range, usually women, can hear it? Okay, that's interesting. That's an interesting idea. I do have problems with it though. So this is Jimmy's plan. He records a voice that only Troian can hear. The problem with that is he would have to record at a frequency that only she can hear. He would have to know what her hearing range is. Because, yes, this is actually a thing. Women do have more sensitive hearing, apparently, than men. But, like anything, it would be highly variable. Some women would be able to hear better and at higher frequencies than others. And some men would actually be able to hear some of these higher frequencies as well. You would have to know the range in which Troian is capable of hearing, and nobody else, including Miss Stoltz. Now, of course, Miss Stoltz is a ghost. Spoiler alert. But Jimmy doesn't know that. If anybody else can hear these voices, it undermines everything that Jimmy is trying to do here. This would require a lot of trial and error. So much so that I'm not even sure it's worth attempting. Really, everything that Jimmy does in this episode is far-fetched, to put it mildly. He has to be able to paint with quite a bit of skill, as well as pull off the technical know-how to do this whole thing where he has tape recorders everywhere, playing voices that only Troian can hear. And he has to creep around the house, setting up these ghostly setups without getting caught by anybody, including Troian herself, because some of the setup is in her room, right by her bedside. So no, I am not quite buying that Jimmy is capable of pulling any of this off. Al eventually points out that the recorder is remote controlled and gang loaded, which I'm not even actually sure what that means. But if there were any other recorders in the area, he'd probably set them off as well. And this thought sends Sam running. He runs into the house, up the stairs, into Troian's room. She's not there. He notices the painting, which now has Troian underneath the water as a dead person. As he's looking at the painting, the door closes and is locked by Miss Stoltz. Okay. Presumably she does this to prevent Sam from getting to Troian, so that the rest of the episode events can happen without Sam Beckett's interference, which would lead to Troian being dead. My question is, why does Miss Stoltz want Troian dead? What's her motivation? As I've already stated, she's a ghost. So why exactly does she want Troian dead? What does she have against her? Is this some kind of revenge? Hey, if this were a horror movie, we would get the motivation behind this. But we're not gonna hear. We're not gonna hear any reason for Mrs. Stoltz's actions here. Cut to Al trying to center himself on Troian, and Ziggy is having trouble doing so. He eventually threatens Ziggy with feeding Ziggy's circuits to Tina's crocodile, and then suddenly he appears right next to Troian, just as he finishes his outburst, which, oh, by the way, Troian should hear, and should freak her out, because she has the ability, thanks to the ghost hunting equipment, to hear Al. But she doesn't. She'll hear him 5 seconds later when Al starts to pretend to be Julian. When Troian asks, "What do you want from me? Do you want me to join me?" And Al says, "No," in a whispery voice. "I want you to live." And Troian asks the natural question, okay, if you don't want me to die, then why is there a painting with me in the lake with you? And oh, here is where we discover that Jimmy is the one behind it all along. And this would mean something to me if I gave a crap about any of these characters, but because of the horrible, horrendous acting, I do not. It also doesn't help. The performances don't help, for sure, but it doesn't help that they didn't in any way try to make Jimmy likable. There's nothing likable about Jimmy in this episode at all. In order for this to mean anything, they would have to make him likable, the performances would have to be more solid than they are, and they would have to develop the sisterly and brotherly bond between Troian and Jimmy, which they do not accomplish at all here. And basically, Jimmy did all this because he had some gambling debts and he needed the money. He was worried about Troian discovering how much money he's actually spent, and when she does so, she was gonna revoke his power of attorney over the money. He was hoping, through all his various machinations, to send her to the funny farm. Or hell, maybe even get her to kill herself. But now he's got to do it himself. So now Jimmy is going to try to kill Troian. And Al is going to try doing the spooky voice thing, though in the most useless way possible, just by repeating his name. I mean, really, you could have used that a little bit more to your advantage. Maybe actually say something useful. But Jimmy isn't fooled. He realizes why he's hearing the voices. He thinks that she is turning the tables on him. So he throws the recorder in the lake. And that's not enough at first, until he realizes the ghost equipment is also causing him to hear voices. So he chucks that into the lake as well, and then resumes trying to kill Troian. Right then, we have another earthquake, and this earthquake shakes a couple of bodies loose from the lake, and they float to the surface, which is enough to give Jimmy pause to temporarily stop what he's doing. And this right here is a very effective, freaky image. Really one of the very few solid moments in this episode. This is a very effective image, but it amounts to nothing really. Jimmy eventually tosses Troian into the lake, and of course, she can't swim. Al tells Ziggy to center him on Sam, and as Ziggy does so, Sam is actually already running on the dock, so he doesn't go very far, which is actually another funny little bit. Sam runs Jimmy off the dock, and he apparently can't swim either, though I'm curious as to how he got the painting from the lake that Troian threw in there. I mean, there's other explanations that could be needlessly nitpicky, but still. Sam dives into the water to save Troian, and eventually manages it. We cut to what I assume is a police detective and some other woman. I'm not even really sure who she is, and I don't really care that much to look into it. But they are looking at the bodies that they found in the lake, none of which is Jimmy, by the way. The bodies were perfectly preserved from 131 years ago, apparently. Troian says she's not sure she can face this, and she mentions the fact that Jimmy tried to convince her that she was going insane and then tried to kill her. And then Sam says, "Oh, but he was sick. You gotta remember that." What? What do you mean he was sick? So let me get this straight, Sam. You're letting Jimmy off the hook for all of his actions and chalking it up to mental illness? This man who set up this elaborate plan involving tape recorders and making sure that a voice could only be heard by her, which I already mentioned is impossible, and then all the stuff that he was pulling in this episode, you're gonna chalk all that up to mental illness? Afraid not, Sam. I'm not buying it. I don't even know why you're trying to sell this. He wasn't mentally ill. Maybe he was a psychopath or a sociopath or whatever you want to call it, but he was not mentally ill. And then they're both gonna let him off the hook with the detective. They're gonna say, "Oh yeah, he drowned trying to save me." Why? He doesn't deserve that. None of this makes even the slightest bit of sense. Eventually, they ask Troian to identify her late husband because they think one of the bodies is him. And sure enough, it turns out to be him. Troian ends up mentioning her butler, mentioning her by name, Miss Stoltz. And that jogs a memory in the woman's mind. And sure enough, one of the bodies turns out to be Miss Stoltz. Are we ever going to find out what she wanted? Why she wanted Troian dead? Nope. Sam, can you just leap the heck out of here so we can end this episode? And Sam leaps. And like I said, that was an absolutely terrible episode, mostly brought down by the horrible acting from Deborah Pratt and Robert Torti. Not helped much by Bakula or Dean Stockwell in this one, though their performances aren't terrible, they're just not very good. The writing is crappy in spots. Some of this doesn't make any sense, including Sam's declaration that all Jimmy's actions are the result of being sick, mentally ill, which I just don't buy. Actually, really, I don't buy any of Jimmy's actions in this episode. They would be impossible to really pull off all of the things that he manages. In another episode, a better episode, perhaps I wouldn't be quite so nitpicky. In fact, some of my complaints are nitpicky. But even without those complaints, This is a terribly, terribly acted episode. Until I stumble upon an episode that's worse than this, I'm declaring that this is the worst episode of the series. Before we go any further and conclude this video, I would like to take a moment to pay my respects to Dean Stockwell. Technically, I've already done that. I've already done a video on his most recent death at the age of 85. I was halfway through making this video when I learned of his passing. My understanding is that he was not well for some time, so I knew if there was going to be a reboot or a revival, Dean Stockwell would have no part in it. He was just not well enough to do so. The man was an acting legend, starting off his acting career at the age of 9 years old. Donald P. Belzerio in interviews has said that he was lucky to get an actor of Dean Stockwell's caliber to play Al Calbici in this series, because you might not remember this, but he was pretty hot at the time, having just done Married to the Mob, which I believe he was nominated for. This series would not have been what it was without Dean Stockwell. He had the comedy chops down for sure. That was obvious in most episodes right from the get-go, but he also had serious dramatic chops, which he demonstrated throughout the series and throughout his career, really. As I said, the man was a legend, and he will sincerely be missed. The next time that we meet, we will be talking about the episode Animal Frat, which, while no classic, is definitely better than the episode that we just watched. If you like this video and want to support the channel, there are a number of ways to do so. You can follow me on Twitter at Core Productions. You can join my Corman Productions Facebook page. You can buy something from the Corman Productions store on Zazzle. You can buy me a copy, which is a new way to support content creators such as myself. And of course, you can like, share, and comment on this video, as well as subscribing to my channel. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.